Hello, and welcome to another episode of Writing Workshop with Hoover. Today, Darlene is going to teach us a special workshop all about writing epilogues. So my first question for you, Darlene, is how do you know when a book needs an epilogue? They all do. Every book needs an epilogue?
Yes, all of them.
Okay, why is that?
Because epilogue is French for last chapter of the book, or maybe it might be Latin for the part where the main character has a baby. I honestly can't remember.
So does that mean that you've never written a book that doesn't have an epilogue?
One time I tried to. When I wrote Verity, I didn't give it an epilogue the first time. That was a big mistake.
Big mistake. Big. Huge.
All my readers were confused by the ending and they left uncertain of who the villain was. At first, I thought that it might be mysterious, but then I remembered that books aren't allowed to have open endings because that's illegal. So I wrote an epilogue and then I published a new edition of the book just to have the epilogue.
Wow, a whole new edition. You must have had a lot to say.
Yeah, it's 37 pages long, making it more than 10% of the book as a whole.
I don't think I've ever heard of an epilogue that's more than 10% of the entire book. I don't think I've ever heard of an epilogue being that long in relation to the rest of the book being more than 10% of the book as a whole.
Well, you can do it as long as you introduce a million new plot twists.
Okay, that's interesting because I thought epilogues were supposed to just be the thing that wraps the story up, to tell you what kind of happens after the main events of the story end. It's kind of just supposed to be there to supplement what we've already read and wrap that up, not create an entirely new story with entirely new plot twists.
You get no sympathy from me! You want sympathy? Look in the dictionary between shit and syphilis!
Again, Savvy, this is why I'm selling more books than you. You're not insane enough.
You know, honestly, Darlene, that's a good point.
Get you some nuts.
Yeah, you effing.
Up yours, woke moralist. We'll see who cancels who.
Hey everyone! Welcome back to my channel. I'm Savvy, and this is Savvy Writes Books, the channel where we do book reviews, literary analysis, media analysis, and video essays. I hope you guys are having a great start to your day. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel if you want to see more funny book reviews like this one. At least I hope you think it's funny. Also, I'd like to give a quick shout out to my Patreon supporters. Their names are up on the screen, and you can check out my top tier Patreon supporters linked in the description below. And also, don't forget that if you want to check out some bonus videos, some blog posts, some additional things like that, that is all on my Patreon as well, and that is linked in the description below. And also, if you like my outfit, check out this dress I'm wearing. If you think my dress is cute, guess what? It's my own merch featuring my original art, and you can get it on my merch website, hipsterunicorn.myshopify.com. Check it out. This is the Doodle Journal dress. All right, let's continue. In today's video, we're going to be doing a close reading of the epilogue to the book Verity by Colleen Hoover. And this video will involve us giving feedback on the writing of the epilogue itself, coming up with ways we could edit the epilogue, and talking about ways that we could improve it. I thought this topic would be fun because a lot of you guys are always telling me how much you enjoy when my videos talk about specific in-depth writing advice and when I use books that I'm reviewing as examples of how we can learn to make our own writing better. And what's really awesome about this video is that today's sponsor has the exact same mission. Today's video is sponsored by StoryForge, an online community-based writing platform where writers can read each other's stories, give each other feedback, and help each other work toward our final drafts and our eventual publication. As their website explains, StoryForge is a website that's dedicated to writers and readers who have felt like they aren't being seen or heard by the big players in the space. Basically, StoryForge's goal is to make book publishing more accessible to as many writers as possible. And to keep writers and readers motivated, this platform uses a gamified process where readers and writers can earn in-game coins to spend on their virtual libraries and other special features. Plus, the site includes a forum called the Writers Circle, where writers can connect and discuss a variety of topics. Starting in a couple of weeks, StoryForge will be launching a Kickstarter campaign to expand their platform. The Kickstarter will run from August 14th until September 10th, and the funding from this Kickstarter will help StoryForge add a variety of new features to their site, like writing streaks, a Pomodoro method writing timer, user interface customizations, and so much more. If you're interested in joining StoryForge's growing community of readers and writers, which has now grown to more than 3,000 users since their beta launch only 6 months ago, then you should check out the link in my description below to storyforge.com. StoryForge.com. I recently made my own StoryForge account, and I'm looking forward to joining some of the forum discussions and maybe posting some future pieces of my own writing to get feedback from my community. You guys know how much I'm always talking about community meaning a lot to me during the writing process, and especially as a super extroverted person who has traditionally very introverted hobbies and activities and passions. I'm always looking to expand my community of writers and readers because I truly believe that creativity is a journey that's most fun when we go on it together. If all of this sounds fun to you, check out the link in my description below for StoryForge.com, where you can create a free StoryForge account and you can use my code SavvyWrites to get 50 free quill coins. That's the in-game currency in the StoryForge universe. And don't forget that StoryForge is launching their Kickstarter soon. The link to the Kickstarter page is also in my description below, so go ahead and check that out as well. Thank you so much to StoryForge for sponsoring today's video. Now, let's get back into doing some writing critiques of our own. This video will focus only on the epilogue to the book Verity by Colleen Hoover. So if you want to see an entire in-depth breakdown of the entire book Verity, you can watch that review, which I've linked in the description below, and I've also linked up in the cards. This video will contain spoilers for the book Verity since we are focusing only on the epilogue at the very end. But if you don't care about spoilers right now, I could also give you just a very quick recap summary of Verity. Let's see if I can do this in like 60 seconds or less. Here we go. Let's refresh our memories. Lowen Ashley is an extremely boring protagonist and struggling writer whose literary agent only signed her because he wanted to fuck her. Verity Crawford is a famous best-selling thriller writer. After a car accident leaves Verity in a coma, Verity's husband Jeremy hires Lowen to finish Verity's best-selling book series as a sort of ghostwriter. Lowen goes to Verity and Jeremy's house to sort through Verity's notes on her series, but in the process she ends up finding a memoir draft that Verity wrote detailing the fact that she murdered her own child. Lowen also falls in love with Jeremy and starts fucking him even though he and Verity are still married. Then it turns out that Verity was faking her coma by just lying really still, which makes absolutely no sense. Jeremy reads the memoir draft and decides to kill Verity as revenge for killing their child. After Verity dies, Jeremy and Lowen run away together, but they then find a letter from Verity explaining that actually the memoir wasn't true and she was only doing a writing exercise to get used to writing in a villain's voice, and that their child's death was actually just an accident. Also, Lowen is now pregnant with Jeremy's kid, and I think they're married and they're raising Verity's one surviving child together. His name is Crew and he was conceived in a canoe. There's so much more weird shit going on, so I do recommend you watch the full other video before this one, but if you don't feel like it, no harm, no foul. Let's get into the epilogue. So first, I want to give a shout out to the Reddit user LividNorth9906 for posting the epilogue on the Colleen Hoover subreddit. My edition of the book Verity unfortunately did not include the epilogue, so I was glad to be able to read it without having to buy the book all over again. I'll be posting pictures of the pages I'm referencing on screen when I'm quoting something, so just know that the credit for those photos goes to Reddit user LividNorth9906. Thank you for your service. If you've noticed a theme in my Colleen Hoover review videos so far, it's that every single book manages to include a paradox. It Ends With Us was both hilarious and disturbing. Ugly Love was both better and worse than It Ends With Us. Verity was both the best book of Colleen's that I've read so far and also the worst. The Verity epilogue has yet another paradox. It manages to make the book Verity so much better than it was before, but also so much worse at the same time. How does it do this? Well, it makes the story a lot more interesting. It confirms that yes, Jeremy is the villain, just like I've been saying all along. It undoes the traditional happy ending that we got at the end of the original book, and then it leaves us instead with this spooky, eerie, uncertain feeling that makes the book succeed a lot more as a thriller. But at the same time, it also makes the book way more confusing. Verity, a book that already made no sense, now somehow makes less sense when the epilogue is taken into account.
Help me help you.
It adds about a million new twists, which all do a great job to just confuse me even further. So when I was in 8th grade, my English teacher gave our class this assignment. We had to take one of our summer reading books and we had to write our own epilogue to it. And I thought it was awesome. We got to basically get graded on writing fan fiction. I think I got a pretty good grade on the epilogue from what I remember, but I did not get a perfect 100%. And the reason that I did not get 100% was that I decided to introduce a new character in the epilogue. The new character, from what I remember, didn't do very much, but in my epilogue scene, I had the main cast of the book going about what would happen after the main events of the book, and then they briefly met my irrelevant OC for some reason. My English teacher explained to me that the epilogue isn't the best place to introduce new major characters or new major plot points, because the purpose of an epilogue is to show us an example of what happens after the main plot points are resolved, not to introduce us to new story elements. I think Colleen must have had a much worse English teacher in 8th grade than I did, because her epilogue does the opposite of this. The epilogue to Verity is 37 pages long.
37.
I'm 37?
With the epilogue included, the entire book Verity becomes 341 pages. That means the epilogue alone comprises 10.8% of the book. The book without the epilogue is only 89.2% complete. That is too much epilogue, Colleen. That is not an epilogue, that is a whole-ass sequel. Now, I want to be clear real quick, disclaimer, there are no hard rules when you're writing fiction. If you enjoyed the epilogue as it was, and you liked that it was long, and you didn't think it felt too long, and you enjoyed it just as it was, you can also be right, okay? You are entitled to that opinion. But I can also see how a lot of readers would find the story to now be more poorly paced, just based on what we're used to seeing in most fiction writing and what expectations we probably have about the pacing of a story. I don't know the exact word count of Verity, but on average, a lot of novels are typeset to be at about 250 words a page, so I think it's safe to estimate that Verity at 341 pages is about 85,250 words, which would mean that the epilogue at 37 pages is roughly 9,250 words long, which is basically half of the length of a novella on its own. If we go to the website Story Planner and we go to the Save the Pet outline, which is based on the outline found in the book Save a Cat Writes a Novel by Jessica Brody, which is based on the screenplay writing manual Save the Cat by Blake Snyder, we can roughly estimate when we should hit each plot point in terms of word count. And when we put in those numbers, it shows us that around 65,000 words into a book of this length, we should be at the start of Act 3. In a novel that is roughly 85,250 words long, the entire third act, the entire thing, would take up roughly 20,000 words of the book if this is being paced like a traditional novel, meaning that the epilogue of Verity alone is the same length as half of the third act. The epilogue alone comprises half of the third act. That is why, in this book, the epilogue felt extremely long. And I kinda loved it, honestly, but I also kinda hated it. Let's get into the confusing paradox here, okay? One of the first things I noticed about the epilogue is that Colleen has a habit of both overwriting and underwriting at the same time. In places where the meaning of her words is already very evident, where it would be very satisfying for the reader to just let those words sit and hang there, just kind of marinate on their own, she will then go on to over-explain everything ad nauseum. And then in places where we need more explanation because what she just said makes no sense on its own, she does not provide any explanation. She just trusts her reader's intelligence when she's being vague, and during times when the sentence would have had a greater impact without any explanation, then all of a sudden we're too stupid to understand anything and she's going to take us through an entire instruction manual of her thought process. The first example we get of this is on page 305, which is the first page of the epilogue. Nova is 3 months old now. We chose the name for obvious reasons. We needed a new start and she gave that to us. So this manages to both overwrite and underwrite at the same time. I'm guessing she means Nova, the meaning of Nova in terms of something being new, like the word novel or novice, or like how Nova Scotia is New Scotland. But here's my issue with the writing here. This would have had the greatest impact if she just said Nova is 3 months old now and then continued on and didn't explain anything further. She didn't need the other 2 sentences at all. If she'd left it alone, we as the readers could then start to think about what Nova might mean, what the impact of that might be, what it might mean to have a new start, and we could start paralleling that with the fact that Colleen pretty much always gives her characters names that have some kind of very on-the-nose meaning. But instead, she adds a second sentence which now draws attention to it. We chose the name for obvious reasons. Well, now that she's saying the reasons are obvious, now it's forcing my brain to start thinking about all the different meanings of Nova. And then, of course, the first meaning I'm going to think of when I hear Nova is the Merriam-Webster definition, which is a star that suddenly increases its light output tremendously and then fades away to its former obscurity in a few months or years. In other words, I'm thinking of Nova being my supernova girl. Zetas Lapidus, Colleen. Then she adds a third sentence to say, we needed a new start and she gave that to us. So now we're back to Nova being about new beginnings. Okay, thanks for the additional clarification. Why do you even need the sentence about obvious reasons then? Remember in my review of Verity, I talked a lot about how our main character Lowen should have been the villain. Well, I think this epilogue sort of starts to actually accomplish that. At the end of Verity, Colleen had Lowen and Jeremy end up together, with Lowen being pregnant, them starting a new life, and it was written in the traditional tone of her romance novels. No subtlety, straight up Hallmark movie happy ending, which did not fit in terms of the disturbing ass thriller we'd just read. And now I'm wondering if maybe other readers were equally annoyed about this, because the epilogue does legitimately portray Lowen and Jeremy to be terrible people in a way that I can't imagine was accidental this time. I think Colleen was like, oops, okay, you're right, let's undo that, you're right, Verity was the wrong choice to make her the villain. I'll show you what I mean. So in a way, this epilogue makes the book better because it makes it 1,000 times creepier, and it does show us that Jeremy is dangerous, like I was predicting all along, but it doesn't work as an epilogue that's only available as a special edition of the book, because if it's showing that Jeremy is the villain and Lowen is an accomplice and a victim at the same time, and Verity is this creepy looming presence who's going to haunt them forever, that completely changes the ending of the book. It completely changes the meaning of everything we read in the main body of the story. It should have been included in the book from day one. This should not have been a bonus chapter. It should have been in the original book. On page 306, we get more of Lowen being judgmental. She says, "I've concluded that whether the manuscript or the letter was the truth, Verity had to be sick in the head to put any of it down on paper at all. No sane, protective mother would be able to write such horrendous fictional things about a child's passing within days of their actual death. Whether Verity is responsible for that death, and whether Jeremy had the right to end Verity's life, are no longer questions that haunt me. Because with the birth of Nova came a true sense of what it means to be a mother. Verity was a dangerous mother either way. I'm convinced of that." In the context of the epilogue now changing things to portray Jeremy as the villain and Lowen as a crossover between an accomplice and another woman who's fallen into his trap, this paragraph sort of does make sense. Of course, Lowen's going to be judgmental of Verity no matter what. She has to be. She's made her bed and she must lie in it. She's helped Jeremy kill Verity, and now she's married to Verity's husband. Of course she has to rationalize herself into believing that Verity must be the villain no matter what. Basically, the epilogue now reframes Lowen as an unreliable narrator, which I like. I think the story of Verity is so much richer if we have our protagonist as an unreliable narrator, but because she wasn't originally portrayed that way throughout the main body of the book, it comes across as a strange tonal whiplash. Since we're currently transitioning out of the book's typical Hallmark movie style ending, this paragraph initially reads as Lowen once again being judgmental of people who think differently from her, which was a thing she did over and over again throughout the book. Even if she didn't kill her child, like, she still wrote about it, so that means it was still justified for me to help kill her, right? If we put this in context of the tone of the book's original ending, this just makes Lowen seem even harder to relate to. But if we frame this in the new context of Lowen being set up as an unreliable narrator who's just blinded by her own passions and her own fears, we see something different. Lowen trying to justify these actions to herself. Lowen trying to rationalize away her own guilt.
Hallelujah. Finally.
On this same page, she follows it up by saying, "Verity deserved her ending, no matter how much it still haunts me." Transitioning out of the book's original ending, this sounds like Colleen herself is saying that regardless of what happened, Verity deserved to die, because the original book painted Lowen to be the sympathetic protagonist. However, with this new framing, it starts to look different. If that sounds confusing, it's because it is. It's because this should have been part of the book originally, and Colleen should have revised the original book to characterize Lowen in a way that would foreshadow this epilogue. As we continue on in the chapter, we now see Verity haunting Lowen in every aspect of her life. Remember how in my first video reviewing Verity, I discussed how there were some signs that Lowen was starting to turn into Verity, but that I was disappointed that the book didn't follow through with any of that. Well, I'm glad to say the epilogue does follow through. Verity goes on to consume Lowen in every thought she has every day for the rest of her life.
Okay, that's enough.
We get this on page 307. "I chose to breastfeed Nova, simply because Verity didn't breastfeed her twins. And no matter how exhausted I am at night, I try to respond to Nova's cries before Jeremy even has the chance to wake up. I want Jeremy to recognize that I'm much more involved than Verity ever was as a mother. Whether she was the manuscript mother or the letter mother, I aim to outdo either version of her. I feel like I'm becoming obsessed with pleasing Jeremy as Verity was in her manuscript simply because I'm in competition with her. This might have more to do with Verity than Jeremy. I don't know why he has this hold over the women in his life. I like this so much better, and I'm so mad that this wasn't in the original book. This is the ending we deserve in a creepy thriller. Lowen is now obsessed with Verity, and we as the reader can see how Jeremy is at the apex of it all. This is so much better, and I feel robbed that I didn't get this the first time around.
I was mugged.
Later on page 307, Lowen continues to slowly morph into Verity, all while denying it, all while trying to distance herself from this woman. I'm standing in mine and Jeremy's bathroom, obsessing over my reflection. I'm still struggling to lose the baby weight, and I doubt it would bother me this much if I had never read Verity's manuscript. It eats at me. Every time I shower, every time I look in the mirror, I think about the lines in her manuscript where she spoke about the first time she and Jeremy were together after she gave birth to twins, and that entire description floats around in my brain like a helium balloon that never deflates. She was so proud of how quickly she bounced back, but I'm not sure my body will ever bounce back. When Lowen first began reading Verity's memoir manuscript, the first judgment she made of Verity was how vain she thought Verity was, how obsessed with her own physical appearance she was during her pregnancy. Lowen found Verity to be evil because she was so conceited for hating the way that pregnancy changed her body instead of just rejoicing in having children. Now, though, Lowen is starting to feel the same body dysmorphia that ate away at Verity, and she hates that she's feeling it because her goal is to be the opposite of Verity in every way. I like that Lowen is suffering. I think she's facing the consequences of her own making, and I think this makes the book so much better. Continuing with the writing being so much better, we now get some resolution to the motifs that were foreshadowed about Jeremy being a creep. Back in the main body of the book, we learned that Lowen's agent, Corey, had signed her as a client because he was sexually attracted to her main character.
What a creep.
Then Lowen and Corey started a relationship, but it didn't work out because Corey was upset that she wasn't just like her main character. Then, when Jeremy hires Lowen to finish Verity's series, we learn that Jeremy chose Lowen because he read her books and fell in love with her through her writing. In the main body of the book, this was never resolved. It seemed as if Jeremy was a good guy because he valued Lowen's writing, not that Lowen was about to make the same exact mistake a second time by falling for a man who targeted her after reading her book. But in the epilogue, thankfully, we finally get a resolution to that, on page 308. I pull back the covers and try to get a peek at the back of the book he's reading as I climb into bed. It's the second thriller he's read from the same author this week. A female, pretty, married. Yes, I googled her. She's gorgeous, a raven-haired version of Verity, and her picture is plastered right on the back cover, so she stares at me from Jeremy's side of the bed while he reads.
Let's kill her.
This is fantastic. Have y'all heard of the expression, if he'll cheat with you, he'll cheat on you? It's almost always true, yet it's pretty common for people to ignore these red flags when they're in that early, passionate honeymoon stage of a sexual relationship. Originally, the book ended with Lowen and Jeremy running away happily together, but now we're seeing that Jeremy is absolutely this type of guy. Reading women's books and falling for them is a habit for him, and Lowen, knowing that she was originally the other woman, is rightfully suspicious. Wow, Savvy, you might be thinking, I'm surprised you're enjoying Colleen Hoover's writing this much. What is it? Opposite day? Don't worry, dear friends, because merely one paragraph later, Colleen ruins the magic by giving into her nasty habit of severely overwriting. The first paragraph on page 309 could be entirely cut from the epilogue, and it would not only help with the pacing, it would also make what we just read hit so much harder. But instead, Colleen feels the need to grossly over-explain this for her readers. It's silly to be jealous of a random author simply because he's reading her book, but he found me this way. He read my books, possibly while lying next to Verity in bed, and then he eventually had Verity's team reach out to me when they decided to hire a new writer. It's only natural that him reading another female author's books would make my stomach hurt. Thank you for over-explaining that for us. Thank you for reminding that Jeremy used to read Lowen's books as if we didn't already learn that in the very same book that we're supposedly still reading. Thank you for having Lowen explain that her stomach is hurt as a result of fear and jealousy. See what I mean? When the words would have a greater impact standing on their own, Colleen feels the need to keep repeating everything in different words just in case we didn't get it the first time. It's so annoying.
This is terrible! Do something!
Then Jeremy and Lowen have sex because even in an epilogue, Colleen cannot stop herself from just non-stop graphic sex scenes. This is not even the only sex scene in the epilogue.
Okay, perv boy?
On page 310, we get a Colleen classic. The line, Jeremy doesn't fuck me, we make love. Now, if I'm being super charitable to the writing here, I could see this as yet another sign that Lowen is turning into Verity, which is the theme of the epilogue. Because remember, Verity used to make distinctions between when she and Jeremy fucked versus made love. However, because Colleen does the fucking versus making love distinction multiple times for every couple in every single book she writes, I think this is just more of her flair for the dramatic than anything else. At the bottom of page 310, we get both a misplaced modifier and a subjective pronoun where we should have an objective pronoun, and potentially some verb tense confusion, which further confirms that the editor was asleep when reading this. But have no fear, Savvy the sexy English teacher is here. This is the sentence. Since giving birth to Nova, the sex between Jeremy and I is gentle. This is a terribly written sentence. First, since giving birth to Nova is not a clause, it's a modifier. Who gave birth to Nova? Lowen did. So the subject that follows the modifier should be Lowen, or I, since it's in first person. But instead, the subject of this sentence's main clause is the sex.
Giggity, giggity, giggity.
Did the sex give birth to Nova? God, I hope not. Then it says the sex between Jeremy and I. The word between is a preposition. Nouns and pronouns that follow prepositions are called the object of the preposition. In English, we don't have noun cases the way that other languages do, so most nouns remain the same whether they're in a subjective or an objective form, or whether they're a direct object or an indirect object, all those kind of things. Most nouns will just remain the same. However, pronouns do still have different cases. That's why we have they and them as two separate words, and he and him and we and us. I could go on all day about how objective pronoun cases are an evolution from Latin, and that's why most of them have the letter M in them, like them, him, me, whom, but that's not what we're here for today. That's just a side tangent. So instead, I will just say this. If you use a word like between, the object of your preposition should not be a subjective pronoun like I, he, she, we. It should be an objective form like me, him, her, us. You don't say between I, you say between me. You don't say between Jeremy and I, you say between Jeremy and me. Let's rewrite this sentence a couple different ways that would fix both mistakes. Since giving birth to Nova, I have noticed that the sex I have with Jeremy is gentle. That way after since giving birth, we get I, which is the main subject of the sentence. Or let's try this. Since I gave birth to Nova, the sex between Jeremy and me has been gentle. In this sentence, we change the modifier to be an entire dependent clause with both a subject and a verb. I gave birth, which clarifies that I, or Lowen, is the subject of that clause, and then allows us to make the phrase the sex the subject of the independent clause without giving it a false modifier. Then we can change I to me, which is an object of the preposition between. I also changed is gentle to has been gentle so that the sentence stays consistently in the present perfect verb tense. Has been gentle makes more sense than is gentle because the present perfect tense is introduced with the conjunction since, plus the past tense verb gave, and then has been gentle goes on to show that it both was gentle in the past, such as right after giving birth, and continues to be gentle to this day, which is why it is present perfect rather than past or past perfect. I hope you enjoyed today's grammar lesson. Now let's get back to the story. Lowen is freaking out about the gentle sex because she remembers reading how hot and rough sex with Jeremy was in Verity's memoir, and she's comparing herself to Verity, like, why doesn't he have rough sex with me? Why doesn't he want to have hot, rough sex with I? Anyway, it's further proof that she can't stop comparing herself to Verity in every way, which from a character perspective I really like. It's taking a story that felt like a cheap Lifetime movie and giving it more of a Twilight Zone vibe at the ending, and I'm honestly here for it. But now, because I'm hyper-vigilant of it, I just noticed that at the bottom of page 311 there's another misplaced modifier. Knowing Jeremy, he'd tell me our sex life is perfect. It should be, knowing Jeremy, I imagine he'd tell me our sex life is perfect, or based on what I know of Jeremy, he probably thinks our sex life is perfect. As it is, knowing Jeremy is modifying the subject of the independent clause, which is he, so it sounds like it's saying that Jeremy knows himself, not that Lowen knows him. By the way, I don't think this one is really that big of a deal because the reader still clearly knows what she means, and most people probably wouldn't even pause to think that that sounds weird. Sometimes I get comments from people saying that they're worried about messing up grammar or spelling or having typos when they're talking to me, and I just want to be perfectly clear with this really quick, guys. I want to be perfectly clear. I do not judge people for things like that, especially in normal conversation. My casual conversations that I have with other people and my social media captions and me just typing to other people in my YouTube comments, they're full of typos. I'm talking off the cuff. Language is a tool of communication. That's not a prescriptive law. But when we're making unnecessary mistakes in a published book, and when it's a pattern like this that are mistakes that have no real reason to be made other than they just are, it starts to feel lazy. That's the difference. So please do not ever worry that I will judge any of you for a misspelling or saying something that's wrong according to the Chicago Manual of Style. I actually put up a post on my Patreon just a couple months ago, which was a blog post about how writing doesn't really have rules, it just has style guides, and the entire point of following a style guide is for the sake of clarity and consistency.
Yes, well, you see, this is why we have rules and regulations, isn't it?
So if the writing is clear and consistent, by definition, it is correct. But these mistakes are not part of an intentional dialect, they're not a pattern of speaking to give us information about a character or to set a tone, they're just the editor being lazy, and I think that makes the difference. I hope that makes sense. Moving on. Page 312 has another Colleen classic, The Pregnancy Fetish. This entire book was set in the pregnancy kink universe, so I'm not surprised she continued that in the epilogue. Jeremy is tucked against my side now, breathing heavily, and he's running a lazy finger between my breasts. It happened again, he says. His voice breaks me out of my spiraling cycle of self-doubt. What happened again? We forgot to use a condom. We should be fine. I'm still breastfeeding. We've been using the lamb method, and while it isn't foolproof, neither is the pill or condoms. Colleen loves to fetishize forgetting your birth control or neglecting birth control or not giving a fuck about birth control. The more careless characters are with contraception, the hotter it is to her.
That Hansel's so hot right now.
And that's because these books are erotica falsely categorized as romance or a thriller. They're erotica set sometimes in the pregnancy kink universe, sometimes in the breeder kink universe, but regardless, I'm kind of used to it from her at this point. Just for the sake of public health and safety though, everybody, yes, it is true that there is no contraception that is 100% effective at all times, but when condoms are used correctly, or when hormonal birth control like pills or an IUD are used correctly, they have a pretty high rate of protection, especially compared to things like pulling out or tracking cycles. It is absolutely safer to use condoms, pills, IUDs, or methods that are given to you by a doctor than it is to just kind of wing it and figure it out yourself. I assume readers already know this because all of Colleen's characters are ending up pregnant constantly all the time, but I know sometimes that teenage girls are reading these books, and the way that sex ed is constantly being cut from public school curricula, I need everyone to know that using actual contraceptive methods is absolutely safer for protecting against pregnancy than whatever the fuck the lamb method is. I looked it up and apparently it's not really a method, it's just the idea that you're less likely to get pregnant while you're breastfeeding, so it's not contraception, it's literally just gambling. On page 313 we get another example of Colleen overwriting. So one of the books Lowen has to write for Verity's series is a book called Truth. This is already extremely on the nose because Verity's name means truth, and the entire arc of her character was speculation regarding whether she was being truthful or whether she wasn't. And the last line of the main story of the pre-epilogue was, which truth was Verity manipulating? But in case you didn't get from all of that Verity means truth, we have this on page 313. How ironic. I have to submit truth first, and everything about this book reminds me of Verity. Even her name means truth. I can't get away from her, even in book titles. Let's trim this to make the writing less repetitive and more impactful. The next novel I have to submit in the series is called Truth. Even her titles mock me. Something like that. Then it would be clearer that she's getting at the irony of Verity meaning truth without having to repeat it for the millionth time. On page 314, we get more pregnancy kink stuff. Jeremy says, I'd have 100 babies with you, Lo. Just add a sentence about how he likes busting fat loads in her to mark his territory, and that's a standard fetish erotica right there. As if we didn't get enough pregnancy fetish in this book, on page 314, I'm not gonna read this out loud, but Jeremy, I'm not kidding. He drinks Lowen's breast milk. He drinks it. He just slurps it up. The writing is extremely detailed. There's lots of suction. Apparently her breast milk is, quote, sweeter than he expected. Thanks for that, Colleen. So Lowen, Jeremy, and Crew, that's Verity's surviving son, don't forget he was conceived in a canoe, they all head on a family trip to the beach along with baby Nova. We briefly get a flashback about Crew, who was conceived in a canoe, to learn more about his trauma, and to be honest, I like the way that Crew is characterized in the epilogue more than in the main body of the story. Remember, he's a 6-year-old boy, and he's experienced the death of both of his older sisters, and then the death of his mom, and then his dad immediately remarrying the woman he was cheating on his mom with, so Crew is obviously fucked up. And I think the epilogue does a much better job of showing his trauma than the story originally did. On pages 318 to 319. It was about 2 weeks before Nova's birth. I was very pregnant and we were still trying to settle on a name for Nova. I'll never forget that moment, as much as Jeremy tries to encourage me to let it go. Crew was seated at the kitchen table, eating a bowl of cereal. I was attempting to make small talk with him as I poured myself a cup of coffee. I said, Crew, what should we name your baby sister? He shrugged and said, I don't care, she's just gonna die. Dude, Crew who was conceived in a canoe is creepy as hell, and I like that. He should be. This kid is traumatized like nobody's business. And then further down on page 319, we get more of Lowen the unreliable narrator, Lowen the anti-hero, Lowen the potential villain or villain accomplice. Perhaps I should burn that memory so I can release my distrust of Crew, but Jeremy wasn't there when Crew bit the knife, and he wasn't in the room when Crew said his baby sister was just going to die, so I feel it's my responsibility to be extra cautious of Crew's potential behaviors. I love him, but I don't know if I can ever fully trust him, which is disappointing because he's just a little boy. I like this because I hate Lowen. Lowen is now once again experiencing the consequences of her actions. She added to this boy's trauma, but instead of acknowledging that, she copes and seethes about it. She rationalizes it to herself by blaming him, by worrying whether she can trust him. I'm hoping that most readers are growing suspicious of Lowen rather than growing suspicious of Crew, but based on some of the discussions I saw in the Colleen Hoover subreddit about the epilogue, I saw a lot of people thinking that maybe Crew couldn't be trusted and maybe Crew was the villain, and it makes me worry that the shifting of Lowen into an untrustworthy point of view character maybe wasn't necessarily intentional. It's really hard to tell, and that's probably because the epilogue is so separate from the rest of the book and it makes everything inconsistent when this should have just been planned better from the beginning. And like, part of me thinks maybe Colleen didn't even intend for it based on how strongly she tends to over-explain other parts in the epilogue, like Verity means truth. Remember? Did you know that Verity means truth? But other times I want to give her the benefit of the doubt and assume that the twist could be intentional. And honestly, whether or not it is, I'm still, as a reader, am getting enjoyment out of seeing Lowen suffer as she starts to slip into being a Wish brand knockoff of Verity. So whether or not Colleen did this on purpose, the effect still hits. Death of the author, murder of the author in this case. On page 320, we see more of the consequences of Lowen's own making. After what she's done, the rest of her life is nothing but misery. This is the exact reason we rarely leave the house. The beach is the only place we usually go, and we only do this when we know it'll be deserted. We're both more than a little fearful about being recognized together. We've told no one about us, nor have we told anyone about Nova. It helps that neither of us have connections we weren't sad to sever. My mother had just died before I met Jeremy, and his parents have passed, so it was easy to get away from the life we knew. Corey doesn't even know I had Jeremy's baby, or that I'm living with Jeremy and Crew. After Verity died, Jeremy and I separated ourselves from one another to minimize suspicion over Verity's death. Lowen and Jeremy now live as recluses, completely cut off from society, no family or friends. The rest of their lives will be spent drowning in a pool of paranoia that they brought upon themselves, and I think that's absolutely delicious. And it further explains why Crew, who was conceived in a canoe, isn't overcoming any of his trauma. Is this kid homeschooled? Does he have to be cut off from society as well? Is he allowed to have friends? I like that she doesn't tell us, but instead leaves it as further evidence as to why Crew is so weird and traumatized and unable to recover. While they're at the beach, they run into a woman named Patricia. Patricia was only briefly present in the main story, but this is who she was. When Lowen and Jeremy went to Target or Walmart or wherever they went to get groceries and tampons, they ran into some of Verity's friends, and the friends thought it was suspicious that Jeremy was at the store with another woman, because you can't go to the store together unless you're married. And then Jeremy did his epic burn full of noob ponage, telling Patricia, say hi to Sherman, when her husband's name was actually William, because Sherman was the guy she was banging on the side. And Lowen was like, oh, epic ponage, Jeremy, you got her ass.
Oh, what a sick burn.
She's a cheater and you called her out. Only for Jeremy to then start cheating on Verity with Lowen like 10 minutes later. Anyway, that was Patricia. And now she's showing up at the beach and she recognizes Crew, who was conceived in a canoe. Crew reveals that the new baby Nova is his sister, who was only born 3 months ago. So Patricia does some quick mental math and realizes, oh shit, Jeremy was banging Lowen back when he and Verity were still married. Patricia's being super passive aggressive, like, oh, Jeremy, good to see you. When I saw you at Verity's funeral, you didn't mention you had a new baby on the way. So Jeremy gets super tense and it starts to scare Lowen. Patricia walks away, and when she leaves, Jeremy whispers to Lowen to take Crew and go to the car and leave. Jeremy takes off his shoes, throws all their stuff in the bag, and tells Lowen don't leave anything behind, not even the trash, and he commands her to take Crew to the car. Lowen leaves the beach with Crew, and on the way out, she looks over her shoulder and sees Jeremy catch up with Patricia. He pushes Patricia into the water and kneels on her back, holding her underwater until she drowns.
What the fuck is that?
Interesting, since his daughter Harper also drowned. Was Jeremy responsible for that murder too? Was he responsible instead of Verity? We'll never know, and I kind of like that we'll never know. I like that we're getting clues that yes, Jeremy is sus, and we might never know what truly happened. We'll never know the truth. The Verity, because Verity means truth, in case you forgot. But again, this should have been in the 3rd act of the book, not in an epilogue. It should have been in the book you bought rather than the special edition that you didn't buy, because it changes everything. When Jeremy gets back in the car, Lowen is visibly upset. We're on page 330. As we're pulling away from the beach, Jeremy reaches for my hand and squeezes it. When I look at him, he's staring hard at me. We had to, he whispers. I nod, because maybe we did. But I wish he wouldn't have said we. We didn't just drown someone, he did. I glance out my window and let the tears silently fall. I like this a lot. This is what the book needed. Lowen starting to finally grow suspicious. Honestly, this epilogue feels like a revision. Like Colleen published too early of a draft and then realized she could do better, so she added this. Again, where is her editor? On page 331, Lowen shows character growth for the first time in the entire book. I don't know how to wrap my mind around what happened. I don't know which part I should be the most worried about. I don't know if I'm an accomplice. That's 2 women dead at his hands now. Am I really going to wait around until he decides to make me number 3? This is the ending I was waiting for. Lowen was blinded by her attraction to Jeremy and thought Verity was the villain. But now she's noticing this pattern and she's growing scared. It's all finally starting to hit her. This is what the main book was missing. An arc for Lowen. Lowen learning from her mistakes and facing the consequences. And now that Lowen's starting to realize how dangerous Jeremy truly is, it's too late. She's trapped. She can't leave him because she knows she could be the next victim if she doesn't go along with what he says. It's not a happy ending. It's dark and it's tragic, but it's so much more interesting and so much more emotionally impactful than what we got before.
Oh my God.
Now we're on page 333. Thank you, I say it in a whisper against his neck, but only because it's all that's left of my voice. The fear has overtaken the rest. I know you did it for us, Jeremy. I can't tell if I'm pretending or if I'm being serious, but the words feel necessary, like a survival instinct. Am I scared of him? No, I was there. This isn't his fault. This is entirely his fault. He had to do it. An innocent woman is dead. She accidentally drowned. He murdered her. I think I might be going crazy. This is, in my opinion, the best writing in the entire book. Lowen's internal monologue going back and forth arguing with herself, trying to rationalize her fears because she knows that the only other option is to live the rest of her life in a state of terror. Combine this with the fact that at the beginning of the epilogue, Lowen saw Jeremy reading a thriller by a third new author. Now each piece of the puzzle adds up to a pattern in Jeremy's behavior. And now Lowen is rightfully terrified that maybe he'll fall for another author. Maybe he'll orchestrate a crazy plot to murder Lowen as well. But even if that's true, she has no idea how to get out of this situation. She's trapped. And then, immediately after that, she sucks his dick.
37. My girlfriend sucked 37 dicks.
In a row?
It's a chilling moment, but also, as Tati would say, when it comes to sucking dick and cock, oh my god, time and place. And by time and place, I mean this doesn't belong in the place of the epilogue, and it doesn't belong in the time of this far into the book. It's not the right time or place.
She doesn't even go here.
Why is the epilogue already given us 2 graphic sex scenes and 1 whole ass murder? This should have been revealed in the main body of the book. Then Lowen notices that baby Nova is missing. Turns out Crew put her outside. Crew was watching TV and Nova was crying too loud and Crew found that annoying, so he just put her outside. He just picked her up when just put her outside. He feels no remorse for this. He sees absolutely nothing wrong with it. So we're now getting more examples of Crew becoming more and more traumatized to the point where he cannot feel or process any emotions properly, where he has absolutely no understanding of empathy or cause and effect. This poor kid is doomed. Both of the kids are, honestly, everybody in this situation. The epilogue doesn't end happily, which I appreciate. From the bottom of page 340 to the top of page 341. I sleep next to a man who has killed 2 women he has deemed as threats. I sleep down the hall from a disturbed child who has seen more trauma in one lifetime than most entire families combined. And then there's me, still keeping score with a dead woman, and somehow losing. There's the fucked up ending we deserved! Although we deserved it in the main body of the book, we deserved it reasonably paced throughout the story, not jammed into a 37-page epilogue. We deserved it sprinkled and planted and foreshadowed. The epilogue is the very definition of too little too late, but at least it was more interesting to read than the rest of the book. But the worst part of the epilogue, by far, is that somehow, in 37 pages, it still doesn't explain how Verity faked being in a coma. How did she fake the brain scans? How did she fool the doctors? We got 37 damn pages of an epilogue, and still, we haven't answered the most pressing question of the book. How did she fake a coma?
Answer me.
Actually, to be honest, it looks like Darlene here is faking a coma pretty well right now. She has no injuries, but she is lying perfectly still. But that could be because she's made of a plastic and vinyl blend, and as a result doesn't have any lungs or veins or arteries, and no heart, just like the Tin Man. Maybe Colleen and Darlene were the same person all along. Ooh, what a cliffhanger ending. I wonder what the truth of this situation is. Are they the same person? We may never know the truth or the verity, because verity means truth. Alright, if you want to know the verity and truth of all of this, you'll have to stay tuned for my 69-page epilogue to this video to find out whether or not that's true. I'm just kidding, I'm not actually gonna make one. And even then, I probably wouldn't answer it even if I did. Anyway, thank you so much for listening to this video. I hope you had a good time. Love you, book bitches. Bye!
Get you some nuts.
Yeah, you effing.
Up yours, woke moralist. We'll see who cancels who.